The doctor's words echoed through Lydia Whitmore's mind like a death sentence as she stood on the dusty main street of Wickenburg, Arizona, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. 6 months, maybe less, her lungs too weak to survive another harsh winter. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, feeling the familiar tightness that had plagued her for the past year, and wondered if she would live to see the next spring bloom across the desert landscape. The consumption had taken her mother at 32, and now at 23, Lydia felt the same shadow creeping through her body with each labored breath. She had traveled west from Boston 3 months ago on her doctor's recommendation, hoping the dry Arizona air might slow the disease's progression. The journey had been brutal, every jostle of the stagecoach sending pain through her weakened frame, but she had made it to this small mining town where her late father's brother owned a modest boarding house. Uncle Henry had welcomed her with open arms, though the worry in his eyes told her he saw the same pallor in her cheeks that had marked her mother's final days. Lydia turned from the sunset and made her way slowly back toward the boarding house, each step requiring more effort than it should. The evening air carried the scent of creosote and dust, and somewhere in the distance she heard the lowing of cattle being driven toward the stockyards. Wickenburg was alive with the sounds of commerce and survival, men seeking their fortunes in the nearby mines or driving herds through the territorial roads. Life pulsed vigorously here, which made her own fading vitality feel even more pronounced. She was halfway across the street when a horse suddenly reared in front of her, its rider fighting to control the spooked animal. Lydia stumbled backward, her weak legs giving way beneath her, and she braced for the impact with the hard-packed earth. Instead, strong arms caught her from behind, steadying her against a solid chest. "Easy there, miss. You all right?" The voice was deep and warm, tinged with genuine concern. Lydia turned to find herself looking up at a man whose sun-bronzed face showed both youth and the weathering of outdoor life. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of sage in summer. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "I am fine, thank you," Lydia managed, though her voice came out breathless and thin. She felt his hands release her carefully as though he sensed her fragility. "You do not look fine, if you will pardon me saying so," he said, his brow furrowing with worry. "You are white as a ghost. Let me help you wherever you are headed." "The boarding house just there," Lydia said, pointing to the 2-story building at the end of the street. "But truly I can manage." "I do not doubt your determination, miss, but I would feel better seeing you safely to your door. Lucas Zimmerman, at your service." He offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Lydia hesitated only a moment before accepting. Her pride wanted to refuse, but her body knew its limitations. "Lydia Whitmore, I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Zimmerman." They walked slowly, Lucas matching his pace to hers without comment. Lydia was acutely aware of how her breathing sounded labored, how each block required her to pause and gather strength. If Lucas noticed, he gave no sign, instead pointing out various buildings and telling her about the town with an easy manner that required no response from her. "That is the Miners' Rest Saloon, though I would not recommend it for a lady. Better food at the hotel dining room 2 streets over. And that general store there, old Mr. Peterson runs it, fair prices and honest scales. The church is just past the livery. New building went up last spring after the old one burned." His voice was soothing, distracting her from her discomfort, and Lydia found herself listening more to the cadence than the words. There was something steady about Lucas Zimmerman, something that made her feel less alone in her struggle. When they reached the boarding house, Uncle Henry was standing on the porch, clearly about to come looking for her. His relief at seeing her was palpable, though it shifted to curiosity when he noticed her escort. "Lydia, I was getting worried. The sun is nearly down." "I am sorry, Uncle Henry. I lost track of time. Mr. Zimmerman was kind enough to help me home after a horse spooked near me. Henry's expression shifted to alarm. Are you hurt? Did you fall? No harm done, sir, Lucas interjected. I happened to be in the right place. Your niece is quite all right, just a bit shaken, perhaps. Henry extended his hand, and Lucas shook it firmly. Henry Whitmore, I am grateful for your assistance, Mr. Zimmerman. Would you join us for supper? It is the least we can offer. Lucas glanced at Lydia, and she saw something in his expression she could not quite name. Interest, perhaps, or concern, or both. I would not want to impose. No imposition at all, Henry insisted. We eat simply, but there is always enough. Lydia found herself hoping Lucas would accept, which surprised her. Since receiving her diagnosis, she had withdrawn from social interactions, seeing no point in forming connections she would soon have to leave behind. But something about this cowboy made her want to know more, to hear his voice a little longer. Then I accept with thanks, Lucas said, removing his hat as he followed them inside. The boarding house was clean and comfortable, if modest. Henry had 3 other tenants, all miners working claims in the nearby hills, but they ate earlier and were already gone to their evening pursuits. The kitchen was warm from the cook stove, and the smell of beef stew filled the air. Lydia's appetite had been poor for weeks, but tonight she found herself actually wanting to eat. As they sat around the small table, Lucas proved to be easy company. He told them about his work on a ranch 10 miles outside town, how he had come to Arizona from Texas 5 years ago seeking new opportunities. He spoke about the cattle drives, the harsh beauty of the desert, the challenges of drought and flood and everything between. He had a gift for storytelling, painting pictures with his words that made Lydia forget her troubles for stretches of time. What brought you to Wickenburg, Miss Whitmore? Lucas asked eventually, his eyes meeting hers across the table. Lydia hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth seemed too heavy for a first meeting, but she had never been good at deception. My health. The doctors thought the climate might help. Understanding flickered in Lucas's eyes, and sympathy, but not pity. She appreciated that more than he could know. The desert can be healing, he said simply. I have seen men come here broken and leave whole again. I hope that proves true for me, Lydia said softly. After supper, Lucas thanked them both and took his leave, but not before asking Henry if it would be acceptable to call on Lydia again. Her uncle looked to her, letting the decision be hers, and she found herself nodding before she could think better of it. I would like that, she said, and meant it. Lucas's smile transformed his face, revealing a warmth that reached his eyes. Then I will see you soon, Miss Whitmore. Good evening to you both. After he left, Uncle Henry cleared the dishes while Lydia sat at the table, feeling more alive than she had in weeks. It was dangerous, she knew, to allow any attachment to form. She was dying, and every sunset brought her closer to the end. But for those few hours, Lucas had made her forget about death and remember what it felt like to simply be present in the world. He seems like a good man, Henry said carefully, watching her face. Yes, Lydia agreed. He does. But you are worried. Lydia looked at her uncle, this kind man who had taken her in without hesitation. I have so little time, Uncle Henry. It seems cruel to let anyone get close when I will only leave them behind. Henry sat down across from her, his weathered hands folded on the table. We are all dying, Lydia. Some of us just know our timeline better than others, but that does not mean we should refuse to live what life we have left. Your aunt, God rest her soul, taught me that. She had 2 years after her diagnosis, and they were the fullest 2 years of my life because we treasured every moment. Tears stung Lydia's eyes. I do not want to hurt anyone. Then be honest, but do not shut yourself away from joy just because it might not last. Nothing lasts forever, child. That is what makes it precious. Lydia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She excused herself and went to her small room on the 2nd floor where she sat by the window and watched the stars emerge over the desert. The night air was cool, easier on her lungs than the day's heat, and she breathed as deeply as she could, feeling the familiar ache but pushing past it. Lucas Zimmerman. She turned the name over in her mind, remembering his steady presence, his kind eyes, the way he had matched his pace to hers without making her feel diminished. It would be foolish to hope for anything, and yet she felt hope stirring in her chest like a bird testing its wings. True to his word, Lucas returned 2 days later. He arrived in the late afternoon with a small bouquet of wildflowers he had clearly picked himself, desert marigolds and brittlebush blooms that thrived in the harsh landscape. Lydia accepted them with genuine pleasure, arranging them in a mason jar on the kitchen table. "Would you care to take a walk?" Lucas asked. "There is a place not far from here where you can see the whole valley. It is not a difficult path, and we can go as slowly as you need." Lydia glanced at her uncle, who nodded encouragingly. "I would like that very much." They walked at an easy pace, Lucas offering his arm when the ground grew uneven. He had brought a canteen of water, which he offered her frequently and seemed attuned to when she needed a rest without her having to ask. They talked about small things at first, safe topics like the weather and the town gossip, but gradually their conversation deepened. "How long have you been ill?" Lucas asked, when they paused on a small rise that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. Lydia appreciated his directness. "It began about a year ago. Just a cough at first, then night sweats, weight loss, fatigue. The doctor in Boston confirmed consumption 6 months ago. He gave me less than a year." "And how much time do you have left by his reckoning?" 6 months, perhaps less. Each sunset that passes takes some of my time with it." The words hurt to speak, but there was also relief in the honesty. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent. "Then I will have to make sure your time is extended," he said finally. Lydia turned to look at him, confusion and surprise warring in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I intend to help you live longer, Miss Whitmore, not just exist, but truly live. The desert has healing properties if you know how to use them. There are springs with mineral waters, herbs that the Apache use for lung ailments, ways of breathing and moving that can strengthen your body. I have seen it work before." "You have treated consumptives?" Skepticism colored her tone. "My mother had it," Lucas said quietly. "Back in Texas. The doctor said she had 6 months. She lived 4 more years, and those years were good ones. She taught me everything she learned about managing the disease, about not giving up even when it seemed hopeless." Lydia's heart clenched. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you. But I did not tell you to gain sympathy. I told you because I want you to know that I understand what you are facing, and I believe there is hope. Will you let me help you?" She looked into his eyes and saw sincerity there, along with something deeper that made her pulse quicken despite her weakened state. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." Lucas smiled, a gentle expression that softened his weathered features. "Because from the moment I caught you in my arms, I knew you were someone worth knowing. And call it foolish or forward or whatever you like, but I want the chance to know you better. That requires time. So I aim to help you get as much of it as possible." It was the most openly romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, and Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You are forward, Mr. Zimmerman, but I find I do not mind." "Lucas, please. I think we can dispense with formality." "Then you must call me Lydia." "Lydia," he repeated, and the way he said her name made it sound like something precious. They stayed on that rise until the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Lucas told her about his mother's treatment, about how she had soaked in hot springs twice weekly, had taken teas made from desert plants, had practiced breathing exercises that strengthened her damaged lungs. He spoke of diet changes, of the importance of rest balanced with gentle movement, of maintaining hope even in dark moments. "There is a hot spring about an hour's ride from here," Lucas said. "The Apache consider it sacred, and they have let me use it because I helped their medicine man when he was injured in a fall. I would like to take you there, if you are willing." "An hour's ride might be too much for me," Lydia admitted. We would go slowly, and I would make sure you were comfortable. We could take a wagon if you prefer, though it would take longer on the rougher roads. But I truly believe the waters could help you, Lydia. Will you at least consider it?" She looked at him, at this man who was offering her something she had thought lost. Hope. It might be false hope, a desperate grasp at straws, but what did she have to lose? She was dying anyway. Why not try everything possible to extend her time? "Yes," she said, "I will try." Lucas's smile was radiant. "We will go the day after tomorrow. I will arrange everything." He walked her back to the boarding house as twilight settled over the town. At the door, he took her hand gently, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "Thank you for trusting me, Lydia. I promise I will do everything in my power to help you." "I believe you," she said, and realized it was true. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Lucas visited twice, bringing supplies and explaining what they would need for the journey to the hot springs. Uncle Henry was cautiously supportive, trusting Lucas's intentions but worried about the strain on Lydia's health. To address his concerns, Lucas arranged for them to camp overnight near the springs rather than attempting the journey there and back in one day. "It will be completely proper," Lucas assured Henry. "I will set up a tent for Lydia, and I will sleep outside by the fire. We will not be far from an Apache settlement, and I will make sure the medicine man knows we are there. His wife can serve as chaperone if that would ease your mind." Henry considered this, then nodded. "I trust you, Zimmerman. And more importantly, Lydia trusts you. Just bring her back safely." On the morning of the journey, Lydia woke before dawn feeling both excited and nervous. She dressed in her most practical clothing, a simple skirt and blouse that would be comfortable for travel, and braided her dark hair to keep it out of her face. When she looked in the small mirror above her washstand, she saw that her cheeks had more color than they had held in weeks. Hope, it seemed, was its own medicine. Lucas arrived with a gentle mare for her to ride and a pack horse carrying their supplies. He helped her mount, his hand steady at her waist, and then swung up onto his own horse with practiced ease. They set out as the sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. The journey was indeed slow, with frequent stops to let Lydia rest and drink water, but it was also beautiful in a way that took her breath away more than her illness did. The desert was alive with morning sounds, birds calling from the saguaros, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of wind through the creosote. Lucas pointed out plants and animals, sharing knowledge he had gained from years of living in this harsh landscape. "That is Mormon tea," he said, indicating a strange jointless plant. "The Apache brew it for energy and to help breathing. We will gather some on the way back." "How do you know so much about the native plants?" Lydia asked Dee. "Necessity and friendship," Lucas replied. "When I first came to Arizona, I nearly died of fever. An Apache hunting party found me and took me to their medicine man. He saved my life, and in gratitude, I have tried to learn their ways and respect their knowledge. The desert kills the ignorant and rewards the wise." They reached the hot springs by late morning. The place was indeed sacred, a series of steaming pools set among red rocks, surrounded by cottonwood trees that provided precious shade. The water bubbled up from deep in the earth, carrying minerals that left colorful deposits around the edges of the pools. Steam rose in wispy columns, visible even in the daylight. Lucas set up camp a respectful distance from the springs, erecting a small canvas tent for Lydia and arranging stones for a fire ring. As he worked, an older Apache woman appeared, seemingly from nowhere. She and Lucas exchanged words in her language, and she nodded, looking at Lydia with dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her damaged lungs. "This is Gray Dove," Lucas said. "She is the medicine man's wife, and she has agreed to help you with the bathing rituals. The springs are most healing when used with the proper prayers and preparations." Lydia felt suddenly shy, aware of her own ignorance and the sacred nature of this place. "I do not want to intrude on something holy." Gray Dove spoke, and Lucas translated. She says that healing is always holy, and the springs were given by the Earth Mother for those who need them. You are welcome here. The older woman led Lydia to a natural changing area screened by rocks and helped her undress, providing a length of cloth to wrap around herself. Then she guided her to one of the smaller pools, testing the water temperature with her hand before nodding approval. The water was hot but not scalding, and as Lydia lowered herself into it, she gasped at the immediate sensation. It was like being embraced by warmth itself. The mineral water lapped against her skin, seeming to seep into her very bones. Gray Dove sat nearby, singing in a low voice a melody that seemed as old as the stones themselves. Lydia closed her eyes and let herself float, feeling tension she had carried for months begin to release. She stayed in the water for perhaps 20 minutes until Gray Dove indicated she should come out. The older woman wrapped her in blankets and led her back to the tent where she instructed Lydia to rest. Despite the heat of the day, Lydia fell into a deep sleep almost immediately, her body surrendering to exhaustion and the healing minerals in her system. When she woke, the sun was lower in the sky and she could smell food cooking. She emerged from the tent to find Lucas tending a small fire where something savory bubbled in a pot. He looked up at her approach and smiled. "How do you feel?" Lydia took stock of her body, surprised by what she found. "Strange. Loose somehow, like my muscles have unclenched, and I can breathe a bit easier, I think." "That is the minerals at work. The heat opens your lungs, and the minerals reduce inflammation. With regular treatments, the improvement can be significant." They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread, sitting by the fire as the desert cooled around them. Gray Dove joined them, and though the language barrier prevented much conversation, her presence was comforting. After eating, the older woman indicated that Lydia should return to the springs for a shorter evening soak. This time, the experience was different. The darkness was falling and the stars were beginning to emerge overhead. Lucas had lit lanterns around the spring area, and their gentle light created an otherworldly atmosphere. Lydia sank into the water again, and Gray Dove began to sing once more. A different song this time, something that spoke of night and healing and the passage of time. Lucas kept a respectful distance, tending the camp and seeing to the horses, but Lydia was aware of his presence like a warm current in the air. She thought about his determination to help her, his gentle kindness, the way he treated her like a whole person rather than a dying patient. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her with anything other than pity or fearful concern. When she emerged from the second bathing, she felt profoundly relaxed, almost boneless. Gray Dove helped her dress and walked her back to the tent, speaking softly in her own language. Though Lydia could not understand the words, she sensed blessing in them, and perhaps warning too. "Do not give up," the tone seemed to say. "Fight for your life." That night, lying in the tent with the flap open so she could see the stars, Lydia listened to Lucas and Gray Dove talking quietly by the fire. Their voices were soothing, a counterpoint to the night sounds of the desert. She found herself thinking not about death, but about life, about all the things she might still experience if she could just hold on a little longer. The next morning, after one more soak in the springs, they prepared to return to Wickenburg. Gray Dove embraced Lydia before they left, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands. Through Lucas, she explained that it contained herbs for tea to be drunk morning and night. Lucas promised to show Lydia how to prepare it properly. The ride back seemed shorter, perhaps because Lydia felt stronger, or perhaps because she was more comfortable with Lucas now. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversation ranging from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Lucas told her about his hope to own his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise good horses and cattle. Lydia found herself sharing things she had told no one else: her love of poetry, her fear of being forgotten, her regret at not having done more with her life before illness claimed her. "You are only 23, Lucas said firmly. "Your life is not over, Lydia. Do not speak as though it is." "But the doctor said," "Doctors do not know everything. My mother's doctors were wrong about her timeline. They did not account for her will to live, or for the healing properties of this land, or for the power of having something to fight for." He paused, then added more softly, "Someone to fight for." Lydia's heart stuttered in her chest. "Lucas, I know it is too soon to speak of such things. We have known each other barely a week, but I have never been one to hide what I feel, and I feel drawn to you in a way I have never experienced before. I want to help you heal, Lydia, but not just as a friend. I want more than that, if you will allow it." She should say no. She should protect this good man from the inevitable grief of her death. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "I want that too." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. They rode in companionable silence after that, but everything had changed. The air seemed charged with possibility, and Lydia felt her heart beating stronger than it had in months. Over the following weeks, Lucas became a constant presence in Lydia's life. He visited daily, bringing her to the springs twice a week for treatments. On the days between, he taught her breathing exercises, showed her how to prepare the herbal teas Grey Dove had given her, and took her on gentle walks to build her strength. Uncle Henry watched with approval, seeing color return to Lydia's cheeks and a light rekindling in her eyes. But it was not just the physical treatments that were healing her. It was Lucas himself, his unwavering belief that she would improve, his refusal to treat her as fragile, even as he respected her limitations. He made her laugh with stories about mishaps on cattle drives. He brought her books from the general store and read to her in the evenings, his deep voice bringing characters to life. He taught her about the desert, helping her see beauty in what she had initially perceived as desolation, and slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It happened in small moments. The way Lucas's hand would linger on hers when he helped her mount her horse, the way Lydia found herself watching for him throughout the day, her mood lifting when she spotted him riding into town. The first time he kissed her, it was after a particularly good day at the springs when she had walked farther than ever before without needing to stop. They were standing by the corral behind the boarding house, and he had cupped her face in his hands and touched his lips to hers with such tenderness it made her want to weep. "I love you, Lydia Whitmore," he said when they parted. "I have loved you since the moment I kept you from falling." "I love you too," she whispered back, "though I fear what that might mean." "It means we will fight together. Whatever time we have, we will make it count." 2 months after their first meeting, Lydia saw a doctor in Phoenix that Lucas had heard about, a man who had studied consumption extensively. After examining her thoroughly, the doctor sat back with a thoughtful expression. "Your condition has not worsened," he said carefully. "In fact, I would say you have improved from where you were. Your lung sounds are clearer and you have gained back some weight. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." Lydia could have cried with relief. Not cured, not promised a long life, but stabilized, improving. It was more than she had dared hope for. That night, Lucas took her to the place where they had first really talked, the rise overlooking the valley. The sun was setting in shades of crimson and gold, and the desert stretched out before them in all its harsh beauty. "Marry me," Lucas said without preamble. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know there are no guarantees about the future, but I want whatever time we have to be spent as husband and wife. Marry me, Lydia." She should be sensible. She should think of all the reasons this was a bad idea. But as she looked at this man who had given her hope when she had none, who had fought for her life as fiercely as she was learning to fight for it herself, there was only one answer she could give. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in the small church Lucas had pointed out during their first walk together. It was a simple ceremony attended by Uncle Henry, some of Lucas's ranch hands, a few townspeople, and Grey Dove with her husband. Lydia wore a dress of pale blue that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her slimmer frame. Lucas wore his best suit, looking almost uncomfortable in the formal attire, but his eyes shone with joy when he saw her coming down the aisle. The vows they spoke were traditional, but they infused them with personal meaning. When Lucas promised to love her in sickness and health, his voice was firm, a vow she knew he would keep. When she promised to stay by his side as long as they both should live, she meant every word, however many days that might be. The celebration afterward was joyful, with music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Lydia tired quickly, but Lucas was attentive, making sure she had a comfortable chair and plenty of water. When the evening grew late, they said their goodbyes and rode out to the small cabin Lucas had been preparing on his employer's ranch. The ranch owner had given Lucas a piece of land and permission to build as part of his wages, an investment in keeping a good foreman. The cabin was simple but well made. One large room with a sleeping area, a kitchen corner, and a stone fireplace. Lucas had furnished it with items he had built himself or purchased from townspeople, and everything was clean and ready for them. "It is not much, Holdar," Lucas said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is ours." "It is perfect," Lydia said, and meant it. This was a home, their home, a place where they could build a life together for however long they had. That night, as they lay together in the bed Lucas had built with his own hands, Lydia felt complete in a way she never had before. Lucas held her gently, mindful of her fragility, but treating her with passion and tenderness that made her feel cherished. Whatever the future held, they had this moment, this night, this love that defied logic and death itself. The months that followed established a rhythm to their lives. Lucas continued working at the ranch, but the owner allowed him flexibility to care for Lydia. Twice a week, they made the journey to the hot springs, sometimes camping overnight, sometimes returning the same day, depending on Lydia's strength. She continued her herbal teas and breathing exercises, and gradually, undeniably, she grew stronger. It was not a steady progression. There were bad days when the cough returned with a vengeance, when she was too weak to do more than lie in bed and focus on breathing. On those days, Lucas was a rock, staying by her side, helping her through the breathing exercises even when they seemed futile, never losing faith that she would improve again. But the good days began to outnumber the bad. Lydia started helping with light chores around the cabin, then gradually taking on more. She planted a small garden near the house, coaxing vegetables from the reluctant soil. She learned to cook the foods that grew well in the desert climate, experimenting with recipes that made use of local ingredients. 6 months after their wedding, Lydia realized she had lived past the doctor's initial prognosis. The sunset no longer felt like a countdown to death, but simply the natural transition from day to night. She mentioned this to Lucas one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sky change colors. "You did it," she said softly. "You extended my time, just like you promised." Lucas took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We did it together. Your will to live, your willingness to try the treatments, your strength through the hard days. I just provided the tools. You did the work. I could not have done it without you. And I cannot imagine my life without you in it. So I suppose we are even." As the first year of their marriage approached, Lydia had another realization, this one both thrilling and terrifying. Her monthly courses, which had been irregular due to her illness, had stopped entirely. At first, she assumed it was another symptom of consumption, but other signs began to appear. Increased appetite, tenderness in her breasts, a kind of bone-deep fatigue different from her illness. She confided in Grey Dove during one of their trips to the springs, and the older woman examined her with knowing hands before nodding with satisfaction. Through Lucas, she confirmed what Lydia both hoped and feared. She was with child. "Is it safe?" Lydia asked immediately. "With my condition, can I carry a baby?" Grey Dove spoke at length, and Lucas translated carefully. "She says your body has healed much. The baby will take strength from you, yes, but if you continue the treatments and take care, there is no reason you cannot bear this child. Many women with lung sickness have healthy babies." Lydia pressed her hands to her still flat stomach, feeling wonder and terror in equal measure. A baby, a life growing inside her. She had thought herself too ill to ever experience motherhood, had mourned that loss along with all the others her diagnosis had brought. But here was a miracle, unexpected and precious. Telling Lucas was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She waited until they were home at the cabin, after supper when the evening was cool and quiet. He was reading by lamplight, and she sat down beside him, taking the book from his hands. "I have something to tell you," she began, and saw immediate concern flash across his face. "Are you all right? Is your breathing worse?" "No, nothing like that. I am—" She took a deep breath, gathering courage. "Lucas, I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." The range of emotions that crossed his face would have been comical if the moment were not so profound. Shock, joy, fear, wonder, all chasing each other across his features. Finally, he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Lydia, are you sure? Is it safe for you?" "Gray Dove examined me. She says if I am careful and continue my treatments, there is no reason I cannot have a healthy pregnancy. But I will not lie to you, Lucas. There are risks for both me and the baby. Then we will face them together, like we face everything else." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You are the strongest person I know, Lydia. If anyone can do this, it is you." His faith in her was humbling and empowering in equal measure. Lydia leaned into his touch, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. "I am frightened. So am I. But I'm also happier than I have any right to be. We are going to be parents, Lydia. That is a miracle." The pregnancy was not easy. Lydia's already challenged lungs struggled with the additional strain, and there were days when she could barely make it across the room without gasping for breath. But Gray Dove visited regularly, bringing herbs and wisdom, and Lucas was tireless in his care. He took over all the heavy chores, hired a young Mexican woman from town to help with cooking and cleaning, and made sure Lydia rested as much as possible. The treatments at the hot springs continued throughout her pregnancy. Gray Dove said the waters would help both Lydia and the baby, and indeed, Lydia always felt better after soaking in the mineral-rich pools. As her belly grew, Lucas helped her in and out of the water with infinite patience, never complaining about the frequent trips or the strain on his own schedule. Uncle Henry visited often, bringing supplies and news from town. He had worried when he first learned about the pregnancy, but seeing how well Lucas cared for Lydia and how determined she was to carry the child to term, he became a source of support and encouragement. "Your mother would be proud of you," he told Lydia during one visit, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You have more strength than she did, more will to live. This baby is lucky to have you as a mother." As autumn cooled into winter, Lydia entered her final months of pregnancy. Her lungs were under constant strain, and she spent much of her time sitting or lying down, focusing on breathing and conserving energy. But the baby was growing strong, its movements visible through her stretched skin, and every kick and roll filled her with determination. Lucas had brought a doctor from Phoenix to examine her in the 8th month, wanting professional assessment. The doctor was cautiously optimistic, noting that while Lydia's lungs were compromised, the baby seemed healthy and well-positioned for birth. He left instructions for Lucas and warned that the labor would be difficult, but stopped short of telling them it was impossible. "You have made it this far," the doctor said before leaving. "That alone is remarkable. Keep doing what you are doing, and you have every chance of delivering a healthy child." Lydia went into labor on a cold January morning, nearly a year and a half after that first sunset when she had believed her time was running out. Lucas had arranged for Gray Dove and the Mexican woman Maria to be present, and he stayed close by, refusing to be sent away as was traditional. The labor was long and brutal. Every contraction stole Lydia's breath, and she struggled to get enough air between pains. Gray Dove worked tirelessly, using massage and herbal compresses, guiding Lydia through breathing that maximized her limited lung capacity. Lucas held her hand, wiped her face, whispered encouragement even when she was too exhausted to respond. There were moments when Lydia thought she would not survive, when the darkness at the edges of her vision threatened to consume her entirely. But then she would hear Lucas's voice, feel his hand in hers, and she would find the strength for one more push, one more breath, one more moment of endurance. Finally, after 18 hours of labor, their son came into the world with a robust cry that echoed through the cabin. Gray Dove placed the baby on Lydia's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face with wonder that transcended words. "We have a son," she whispered to Lucas, who was openly crying. "You did it," he said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You did it, my love. You brought our boy into the world." They named him Thomas, after Lucas's father. He was healthy and strong, with his mother's dark hair and his father's eyes. Those first weeks were exhausting, with feedings every few hours and the constant demands of a newborn, but Lydia had never felt more alive. She was tired, yes, and her lungs protested the lack of sleep, but she was here, she was alive, and she had a son. Lucas was a devoted father, taking over night feedings when possible with milk, Lydia expressed, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply holding Thomas and marveling at the tiny life they had created. Watching them together, Lydia felt her heart would burst with the fullness of her love. As Thomas grew from newborn to infant, Lydia gradually regained her strength. The pregnancy had taken a toll, but with rest and continued treatments, she found herself actually healthier than before. Gray Dove explained through Lucas that sometimes bearing a child could strengthen a woman's body in unexpected ways, that the will to live for another could be powerful medicine. By Thomas's first birthday, Lydia was stronger than she had been since before her diagnosis. She still had limitations, still needed to be careful about overexertion, but she was living, truly living, in a way the Boston doctors would have said was impossible. Lucas's dream of his own ranch finally came to fruition when his employer decided to sell. With money saved and a loan from Uncle Henry, Lucas purchased the land where their cabin stood, plus additional acreage for grazing. It was not a large spread, but it was theirs, a place where they could build a future for Thomas and any other children who might come. On Thomas's second birthday, Lydia woke to find Lucas watching her with an expression of wonder on his face. "What is it?" she asked, reaching out to touch his cheek. "Do you know what today is, besides our son's birthday?" Lydia thought back, counting months and years in her head, and realization struck. 4 years. 4 years since the doctor in Boston told me I had 6 months to live. You have lived 8 times longer than he predicted. 8 times, Lydia. And you are not just surviving, you are thriving. She sat up, considering this. It was true. She still had her herbal teas and her breathing exercises, still made weekly trips to the springs. She would never be fully cured, would always need to be mindful of her limitations. But she was healthy, happy, living a full life with a husband she loved and a beautiful son. "You extended my time," she said, echoing their early conversations. "Every sunset brought me closer to the end, but you made sure each sunrise was a new beginning." "We did it together," Lucas insisted, as he always did. "But I am greedy, Lydia. I want more time. I want decades, not just years. I want to see Thomas grow up, and maybe another child or two. I want to grow old with you." "I want that too," Lydia said, and kissed him with all the passion and gratitude in her heart. That afternoon, they had a celebration for Thomas's birthday with Uncle Henry, Gray Dove, and her husband Maria and her family, and several friends from town. There was food and music and laughter, and watching her son toddle around with cake on his face, Lydia felt profound gratitude for every moment that had led to this one. As the sun set that evening, painting the Arizona sky in its familiar shades of orange and gold, Lydia stood on her porch with Lucas beside her and Thomas on her hip. She thought back to that first sunset she had watched in Wickenburg, when she had felt death approaching with each fading light. She had been so certain her time was running out that nothing could be done to prevent the inevitable. But Lucas had proven her wrong, not through magic or miracles, but through steady dedication, through treatments that honored both Western medicine and Apache wisdom, through love that refused to accept defeat. He had made sure her time was extended day by day, sunset by sunset, until those days had accumulated into years. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, his arm around her waist. "How grateful I am for you, for Thomas, for this life we have built, for every day I thought I would not have." "You will have many more," Lucas said firmly. "We are just getting started, Lydia." And as Thomas laughed and pointed at the sunset, Lydia believed him. The future stretched out before them, not guaranteed, but possible, filled with all the ordinary miracles of a life well lived. She had been given a second chance, and she intended to make the most of every moment. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. When he was 3, Lydia discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that brought both joy and some concern given her history. But the second pregnancy was easier than the first, her body now stronger and better prepared. She delivered a healthy daughter just after Thomas's 4th birthday, a girl they named Eleanor after Lucas's mother. Eleanor was different from Thomas in every way, quieter and more contemplative, with her father's serious nature and her mother's love of stories. Lydia would sit with both children on the porch in the evenings, Eleanor in her lap, and Thomas pressed against her side and read to them from the growing collection of books Lucas bought on his trips to Phoenix. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Lucas had a gift for horses, and his breeding program began to attract attention from buyers across the territory. They were never wealthy, but they had enough. And more importantly, they had each other. Uncle Henry remained a constant presence until his death when Thomas was 7, leaving the boarding house to Lydia in his will. They sold it but kept the money aside, wanting security for their children's future. Gray Dove and her husband became like family, teaching the children about the desert plants and animals, sharing stories of Apache traditions, providing a bridge between cultures that enriched all their lives. When Gray Dove's husband passed, she moved into a small house on Lucas and Lydia's property, where she continued to prepare her healing herbs and welcome those who sought her wisdom. Lydia never stopped her treatments entirely. She still drank her morning tea, still practiced her breathing exercises, still visited the hot springs regularly, though now she often brought the children along, teaching them to appreciate the sacred nature of the place. The consumption never fully left her, but it was managed, controlled, reduced to a chronic condition rather than a death sentence. When Thomas was 12 and Eleanor 8, Lydia surprised them all by becoming pregnant once more. At 35, she was older for childbearing, and Lucas worried, but Lydia felt strong and confident. She delivered twin boys, Jonathan and James, who were healthy and robust from their first breath. The house had to be expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Lucas built on 2 new rooms with Thomas's help, the boy now old enough to be truly useful. Lydia watched them work together, father and son, and felt blessed beyond measure. Her oldest child had no memory of her illness, knew her only as the mother who was always there, who told stories and bandaged scrapes and made everything better with her presence. Eleanor, sensitive and intuitive, sometimes asked questions about her mother's past. Lydia answered honestly but without drama, explaining that she had been very sick once, but that her father and the desert and Gray Dove had helped her get better. She wanted her children to understand the value of perseverance, the importance of not giving up even when things seemed hopeless. As the twins grew from babies to toddlers to active young boys, the house was never quiet. There was always someone needing something, always laughter or crying or the thunder of running feet. It was exhausting and wonderful, and Lydia treasured every chaotic moment. This was the life she had thought impossible, the family she had never dared dream of having. Lucas remained her rock through all of it, still as devoted as he had been that first day when he caught her in his arms. He made sure she rested when she needed to, took over when she was tired, and never let her push herself too hard. But he also trusted her to know her own limits, to manage her health with the wisdom she had gained over the years. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Lydia back to the rise where he had proposed. The children were with Grey Dove for the afternoon, giving them rare time alone. They sat together watching the sun descend toward the horizon, and Lydia marveled at how different this sunset felt from that first one a decade ago. "Do you remember what I said the first evening we really talked?" Lucas asked. "You said you would make sure my time was extended. And I have kept that promise. But what I have learned is that extending time is not about adding days to life. It is about adding life to days. We have had 10 years, Lydia, but they have been full years, rich years. That matters more than the number." Lydia leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. "I owe you everything." "You owe me nothing. Everything we have, we built together. I may have shown you the path to healing, but you walked it. You did the hard work of living when it would have been easier to give up." "I had something worth living for," Lydia said softly. "Someone worth living for." They watched the sunset in comfortable silence, two people who had defied expectations and built a life that was more than either had dreamed possible. The sky blazed with color, and Lydia no longer saw each setting sun as time running out. Instead, she saw it as simply another day completed, another sunset that would be followed by a sunrise, another piece of the ongoing miracle that was her life. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning everything Lucas could teach him about horses and cattle and the land itself. Eleanor discovered a talent for healing, learning from Grey Dove and eventually studying with the doctor in Wickenburg, determined to help others the way her mother had been helped. The twins were still young, full of energy and mischief, but showing signs of their own unique personalities. As Lydia approached 40, she was healthier than she had any right to be. The doctors she saw for occasional checkups were always amazed by her condition, noting that while her lungs showed the scarring of past disease, they functioned far better than expected. She credited the treatments, the desert air, and the will to live that came from having so much worth living for. Lucas had lines around his eyes now, silver threading through his dark hair, but to Lydia, he was as handsome as the day she met him. He had kept every promise he ever made to her, had given her not just extended time, but a beautiful life filled with love and purpose. One evening, as they sat on the porch with the grandchildren Thomas's wife had provided playing at their feet, Lydia reflected on how far they had come. From that desperate young woman watching the sunset and counting her remaining days to this, a grandmother surrounded by family, her lungs still working, her heart still beating, her life still full of possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, the question familiar after so many years. "How you saved my life." "We have been over this. You saved yourself." "Then how we saved each other," Lydia amended, "how every sunset you promised my time would be extended, and how you kept that promise over and over again." Lucas took her hand, his grip still strong despite his years. "I plan to keep extending it for a long time yet. We have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet. I am not done with you yet, Lydia Zimmerman." She laughed, the sound clear and strong, no wheeze or cough interrupting it. "Good, because I am not done with you either." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in glorious color, Lydia thought about time and how we measure it. Not in days or months or years, but in moments of love and purpose and connection. She had been told her time was running out with every setting sun, but Lucas had shown her that time was not finite if you filled it with life. Every sunset brought a new beginning. Every dawn, a chance to add more living to the days she had been given. And so, they sat together as the stars emerged. Two people who had faced death and chosen life, who had taken a diagnosis of 6 months and turned it into decades. Their children's laughter drifted from inside the house. The desert wind whispered through the creosote, and Lydia felt complete. Her time had been extended not just in length, but in depth and breadth and richness beyond anything she had imagined possible. The cowboy had kept his promise, and together they had built a life that was worth every breath, every sunset, every precious moment. It was a story of healing and hope, of love that refused to surrender to circumstance, of two souls who found each other at exactly the right moment and held on through everything that followed. And it was not over yet, not by a long measure. There were still sunsets to watch, still days to fill with life, still time to extend together as they had always done, one moment at a time, one sunset leading to another sunrise, forever and always.